The house did not grow silent after that quiet transfer of trust. Instead, it seemed to breathe differently, as though it had recognized the shift and gently welcomed it. No one felt the need for applause or celebration. The moment had already carried everything it needed: understanding, continuity, and an unspoken promise. The young man did not step into leadership with grand gestures. The very next morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual, just as he had done countless times before. The building looked the same from the outside, glass reflecting the early sunlight, security guards nodding respectfully as he entered. Yet for him something had changed. He no longer walked through those doors as someone learning. He walked in as someone entrusted. Inside, the familiar rhythm of the workplace unfolded. Assistants moved between desks, phones rang softly, and the low murmur of conversation filled the air. He paused for a brief moment in the lobby, remembering how he used to walk these same floors holding his grandfather's hand, feeling small among tall desks and busy professionals. Back then, the world of business had seemed mysterious and distant. Now it felt like an extension of the values he had grown up with. In the main conference room, his mother and aunts were already seated, reviewing documents. They looked up as he entered, their expressions calm and encouraging. There was no trace of doubt in their eyes. They had spent years preparing him not only with knowledge, but with perspective. They did not expect perfection. They expected integrity. The meeting began with practical matters: expansion proposals, budget adjustments, a discussion about a new community partnership. He listened carefully, occasionally asking questions that revealed both caution and curiosity. When it was his turn to speak, he did so without rushing. He acknowledged the risks in certain ventures but also recognized the opportunities for growth. He emphasized sustainability over speed, long-term relationships over quick gains. As the discussion continued, a quiet realization settled over the room. The leadership had shifted, but the spirit had not. The foundation built by forgiveness and unity remained steady beneath every decision. Later that afternoon, he requested a walkthrough of one of the company's newer training centers. This particular center had been created to support young entrepreneurs from underserved neighborhoods, many of them young women who had once struggled to find access to capital or mentorship. The project had been his mother's initiative, inspired by her own journey from being underestimated to becoming a respected leader. The young man moved through the halls slowly, stopping to speak with participants. He asked about their ideas, their challenges, their ambitions. He did not speak down to them or rush through polite greetings. He listened, sometimes longer than his schedule allowed. One young woman explained how she had grown up watching her parents work tirelessly without ever breaking free from debt. She wanted to build something that would give her family stability. He nodded thoughtfully and told her that the company would provide not only funding but guidance, because success required more than resources. It required belief. As he left the center, he felt something familiar stir inside him. It was the same feeling he had sensed years ago while sitting in the garden beside his grandfather. A reminder that leadership was not about being seen. It was about seeing others. That evening, he returned to the family home. The house remained the emotional anchor of their lives, even as the business expanded across regions. The garden had grown fuller over the years, trees stretching higher, flowers blooming in quiet abundance. His grandfather sat outside, wrapped in a light shawl, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. The young man joined him without speaking at first. They had never needed many words between them. After a while, the older man asked gently, "How was your first day carrying the weight?" The young man smiled faintly. "It felt heavy," he admitted, "but not in a frightening way. More like something that reminds you to stand straight." The older man nodded. "That is how responsibility should feel. It should not crush you. It should steady you." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the distant hum of the city. The grandfather's breathing was slower now, his movements careful, but his eyes still carried that same quiet wisdom. "I am proud of you," he said eventually. "Not because you lead, but because you listen." The words lingered in the evening air, simple yet profound. The young man felt a deep gratitude that could not be fully expressed. He understood that time was moving forward, gently but steadily. He also understood that every conversation with his grandfather was becoming more precious. Months passed, and the company continued to evolve under his leadership. He introduced small but meaningful changes. Transparent communication channels between management and staff. Regular forums where employees could propose ideas directly. Expanded mental health support for workers balancing demanding jobs with family life. These decisions were not driven by trends. They were rooted in the lessons he had absorbed since childhood. Some external partners were initially skeptical. They wondered whether such an empathetic approach might slow profitability. Yet the opposite began to occur. Employee retention improved. Innovation increased. Trust deepened across departments. The company's growth remained steady, but now it was accompanied by a stronger sense of shared purpose. At home, family dinners continued to serve as an informal boardroom of sorts. Around the long wooden table, business matters blended with personal stories. His mother would share updates from a recent conference. One aunt might discuss a new community initiative. Laughter frequently interrupted serious conversations. Disagreements arose, but they were handled with respect rather than raised voices. The grandfather attended these dinners whenever his health allowed. He rarely offered direct advice unless asked. Instead, he observed, occasionally smiling as he witnessed the unity he once feared he had destroyed. One night, after most of the dishes had been cleared away, the young man asked his grandfather a question that had quietly followed him for years. "Do you ever wish you could go back and change things sooner?" The older man did not answer immediately. He looked around the table at his daughters, now confident and accomplished. He looked at his grandson, steady and compassionate. Then he shook his head gently. "If I had learned too early," he said, "I might not have understood deeply enough. Pain taught me what pride never could. And without that lesson, I would not recognize the beauty of this moment." The young man absorbed those words carefully. They were not a justification of past mistakes. They were an acknowledgement of growth. Time, as it always does, continued its quiet progression. The grandfather's steps grew slower, his presence more delicate. Yet his spirit remained steady. On warm afternoons, he still asked to be taken to the garden. There, he would watch as his great-grandchildren, the next generation, began to run across the same grass where their father had once chased butterflies. The sight filled him with a peace that required no explanation. The young leader often found himself standing at the large window overlooking the city, just as his grandfather once had. The lights stretched endlessly into the distance, representing opportunity, ambition, and complexity. But he no longer viewed the city as a stage for personal triumph. He saw it as a network of lives interconnected by decisions made quietly in conference rooms and homes alike. He understood that legacy was not a single achievement. It was a pattern repeated across time. Each generation either strengthened or weakened it through their choices. Under his guidance, the company began investing in environmental sustainability projects, ensuring that growth did not come at the cost of future generations. They partnered with educational institutions to provide scholarships in fields related to ethical business practices. They created mentorship networks that connected experienced leaders with young entrepreneurs from marginalized communities. These initiatives were not publicity strategies. In fact, the family often declined awards and media attention, preferring to let their work speak quietly. One early morning, as sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, the grandfather did not wake at his usual hour. The house, accustomed to his gentle presence, felt an unfamiliar stillness. When the family gathered around him, they found his expression peaceful, as though he had simply drifted into a deeper rest. Grief entered the house, but it did not shatter it. Tears flowed freely. Memories were shared openly. There was sorrow, but there was also gratitude. He had witnessed the transformation he once doubted possible. He had seen his family united. In the days that followed, the young leader felt the weight of absence more than the weight of responsibility. Yet even in grief, he sensed his grandfather's influence woven into every decision he made. At the company, he addressed the employees not with a formal speech, but with sincerity. He spoke about the man who had once defined success narrowly, and who had later redefined it entirely. He spoke about second chances, about humility, and about choosing unity even when pride tempts division. There were no dramatic declarations, just a shared understanding that the values shaping their work had been forged through both failure and forgiveness. Years continued to unfold. The company's reputation strengthened, but more importantly, so did its culture. The next generation grew up witnessing not only prosperity but purpose. They saw leadership modeled as service. They saw conflict resolved with patience. They saw that power, when guided by compassion, could build rather than divide. On quiet evenings, the young leader would sit in the garden where he once asked why families fight. Now, as a father himself, he sometimes faced difficult questions from his own children. He answered them honestly, just as his grandfather had answered him. He did not hide the family's history. He framed it as proof that growth is possible. The house remained lively, filled with voices, footsteps, and shared meals. It had become more than a residence. It was a living testament to transformation. And as seasons changed, as children grew and new responsibilities emerged, one truth remained constant beneath it all. The strength of their legacy did not lie in buildings, contracts, or financial records. It lived in everyday choices, in listening before speaking, in forgiving before condemning, in building bridges where walls once stood. The story of their family did not conclude with a single generation stepping forward. It continued quietly, shaped by each sunrise and each difficult conversation handled with care. The young leader knew that one day he too would sit in a chair, watching another pair of unsteady steps cross the living room floor. When that day came, he hoped he would feel what his grandfather once felt. Not pride in control, but gratitude for continuity. Not satisfaction in wealth, but peace in unity. The years passed with a steady rhythm, almost like the turning of pages in a book written by unseen hands. The young leader, now fully immersed in his role, came to understand that every choice he made resonated far beyond the confines of the office or the family home. Each decision carried the echoes of his grandfather's wisdom, his mother and aunt's guidance, and the experiences of a family that had weathered its share of storms. He approached the company with the same humility and attentiveness he had learned as a child. In board meetings, he listened more than he spoke, giving space for ideas to emerge from every corner of the organization. When disagreements arose, he did not enforce authority. Instead, he encouraged dialogue, steering conversations toward shared solutions. Slowly, he cultivated an atmosphere where people felt respected, heard, and valued, not simply as employees, but as contributors to a larger vision. Employees began to notice subtle changes in the workplace culture. Ideas flowed freely from juniors to executives, and mentorship programs flourished. Small gestures of acknowledgement, like a personal note for a project well done, or a quiet word of encouragement, became standard practice rather than rare exceptions. Even those who had joined the company during earlier, more rigid years felt the difference. Work was no longer a battleground of hierarchy. It had become a shared endeavor. At home, the rhythm of family life mirrored the harmony he fostered at work. Weekends were spent together, sometimes quietly, sometimes filled with the energy of children running across the garden or chasing each other around the house. Family dinners remained a sacred ritual, where stories of triumphs and mistakes were exchanged with the same openness that had guided him as a child. The young leader often found himself in the garden at twilight, speaking with his own children about values, responsibility, and the meaning of legacy. "Why do some people hold on to anger, Father?" his eldest daughter asked one evening as fireflies danced in the fading light. He thought carefully before responding, recalling countless conversations with his grandfather and the lessons embedded in them. "Because they forget that life gives second chances," he said softly. "And because it can feel easier to cling to what hurts than to let it go. But every time we choose forgiveness, we build something stronger than anger could ever be." His children absorbed the words with the thoughtful quiet of those who understood that life's wisdom is best learned through example rather than lecture. Later, he watched them play in the grass, the same lawn where he had once chased butterflies as a boy. In their laughter, he recognized the unbroken thread of continuity, the resilience of a family that had refused to let pride define them. Meanwhile, the company continued to expand thoughtfully. The young leader spearheaded initiatives that balanced growth with social responsibility. New offices opened, each one designed to integrate community support programs, scholarships for local youth, training workshops for aspiring entrepreneurs, and support networks for families struggling to find stability. He ensured that every project aligned with the values instilled in him: integrity, empathy, and long-term thinking. There were challenges, naturally. Economic downturns, competitive pressures, and internal disagreements tested his patience and resolve. Yet he approached each difficulty with the same calm determination he had observed in his mother and aunts. He did not see challenges as threats to his authority, but as opportunities to demonstrate leadership through collaboration and reflection. One day, a crisis emerged that threatened to unsettle even the most carefully managed parts of the company. A partnership with a significant community organization had faltered due to miscommunication and mismatched expectations. Rather than assigning blame or reacting with anger, the young leader convened a meeting with all parties involved. He listened to grievances, acknowledged mistakes, and encouraged solutions that would restore trust. The outcome was not instantaneous, but it was lasting. By approaching the problem with transparency and patience, he not only repaired the partnership but strengthened the reputation of the company as one committed to ethical practice. In the years that followed, the family home continued to serve as a haven. It remained a place where memories were preserved and new ones created. The grandfather's chair, though empty, was never removed. It became a symbol of continuity, a reminder of lessons learned and the strength that comes from humility and forgiveness. Visitors often remarked on the warmth that seemed to permeate every room, and the family took quiet satisfaction in knowing that their cohesion had become an enduring force. The young leader also dedicated time to preserving the company's historical records, not merely as documentation of financial success, but as a testament to the human stories behind every decision. He commissioned a series of journals, photographs, and interviews that captured both the struggles and triumphs of the family and the organization. Employees, past and present, contributed their recollections. The result was a living archive of resilience and compassion, intended to guide future generations in understanding the values that had sustained the family through decades of change. As decades passed, the family continued to grow. Great-grandchildren began to run through the halls, their laughter echoing across the garden in the evenings. The young leader, now middle-aged, often paused in those moments to reflect on the journey that had begun long before him. He remembered the lessons of his grandfather, the value of patience, the quiet strength of listening, and the transformative power of forgiveness. He recognized that wealth and prestige were fleeting, but love, understanding, and unity could endure indefinitely. He took time to mentor not only his own children but also the younger employees and community members who had come under the company's guidance. He emphasized that leadership was not an inheritance of title, but a responsibility earned through action and character. Every decision, every interaction, was an opportunity to reinforce the culture of integrity and empathy that had defined the family for generations. One particularly warm afternoon, he walked through a newly built community center, designed to support families affected by economic hardship. Children played in the open spaces, while adults attended workshops on financial literacy and small business development. He paused to watch a young boy, no more than 5, hesitating at the edge of the playground before taking his first unsteady steps toward a small group of children. The scene mirrored a memory from his own childhood, the moment when hope and possibility had first entered his life. In that instant, he understood the cyclical nature of life. Just as his grandfather had nurtured him, he now had the privilege and responsibility of nurturing the next generation. He felt the same quiet pride and gratitude that had defined so many of the family's pivotal moments. Leadership, he realized again, was about enabling others to grow, rather than asserting dominance over them. The family's influence extended beyond the business and the immediate community. Their reputation for integrity, fairness, and compassion attracted partnerships with organizations across the region. Governments, educational institutions, and nonprofits sought their guidance on initiatives that balanced economic growth with social responsibility. Yet despite the reach of their impact, the family remained grounded, guided by the principle that meaningful work begins at home and in everyday interactions. Even as the young leader aged, he remained committed to fostering the values that had shaped him. He introduced a structured program within the company to ensure that the principles of unity, respect, and ethical leadership were passed down. Every new employee participated in workshops and mentorship sessions that emphasized character development alongside professional skills. The goal was clear. The company's legacy should not rest solely on past achievements but should be continually renewed through responsible action and conscious decision-making. Home life, too, flourished. Dinners continued, often extending late into the evening as conversations spanned multiple generations. The great-grandchildren asked questions about the family's history, about choices that had seemed impossible at the time, and about the lessons learned along the way. The young leader answered patiently, never shying away from difficult truths. He told them about moments of doubt, about pride and its consequences, and about the ways forgiveness had reshaped their lives. In doing so, he ensured that wisdom was not only remembered but internalized. Seasons cycled in a gentle rhythm. Gardens bloomed and faded, children grew taller and stronger, and the city outside continued its constant hum of life. Through it all, the family remained a steady presence in one another's lives, anchored by shared experience and mutual respect. The home, the company, and the community they nurtured existed in harmony, each reflecting the values that had been painstakingly cultivated over decades. There were times of challenge and sorrow, of course. Illness, financial turbulence, and disagreements tested their resilience. Yet each challenge was met with the same approach that had defined the family from the beginning: patience, understanding, and a commitment to unity. The young leader encouraged open dialogue, ensuring that problems were addressed before they could fester into resentment. In doing so, he reinforced the truth his grandfather had taught him: that a family, like a company or a community, succeeds not in spite of challenges, but because of how it navigates them. As the young leader reflected on his own life, he often thought of the first steps his grandfather had witnessed, the unsteady yet hopeful beginnings that had set their family on this path. He understood that the strength of a legacy lies not in its beginnings or its peak achievements, but in its ability to adapt, endure, and uplift each generation that follows. And so, with each passing year, the family continued to grow and evolve. Their story was no longer defined by past mistakes or lost opportunities, but by the choices made in the present. Choices that emphasized compassion over pride, forgiveness over resentment, and service over self-interest. The young leader, now a pillar of stability and wisdom, walked each day guided by the lessons of those who had come before him, while nurturing those who would one day follow. The company thrived not just in profit, but in purpose. The family home remained a sanctuary of warmth and continuity. And outside, in the broader world, the impact of their values rippled outward, touching lives in ways too numerous to count. Children who had once lacked opportunity now had access to education, mentorship, and a vision for the future. Communities once overlooked found advocates and allies. And throughout it all, the family's guiding principles, unity, empathy, and integrity, remained steadfast, carried forward in every action and every decision. Through decades of growth, triumph, and quiet reflection, the family became a living testament to the power of change, the necessity of forgiveness, and the enduring strength of love. Each generation contributed to a narrative larger than themselves, reinforcing a cycle of responsibility and compassion that promised to continue long after the young leader himself had walked the garden paths beside the children of the next generation. The story of their lives, though unassuming in its day-to-day rhythm, became extraordinary in its continuity. It was a story not of wealth or accolades, but of resilience and the conscious choice to nurture, protect, and uplift one another. And as the sun set each evening, bathing the garden and the home in golden light, it was clear that the legacy of their family, the lessons learned, the love shared, and the unity achieved, was alive and thriving, ready to guide yet another generation toward a future defined not by power, but by strength of character, generosity of spirit, and the quiet courage to choose what truly matters. The young leader, sitting on the veranda one warm evening, watched as his children played with the great-grandchildren, laughter spilling into the garden and across the house. He thought of the generations that had come before, of the missteps and recoveries, of the times when unity seemed impossible. And he understood, in a way only experience can teach, that the true measure of a life's work is not in accolades, buildings, or wealth, but in the continuity of care, understanding, and love passed from one heart to another. He knew that the story was far from over. Each new day brought choices, lessons, and opportunities for growth. And he was confident that the family, anchored by the principles that had guided them through so many challenges, would continue to navigate life's uncertainties with the same quiet strength, compassion, and commitment to unity that had defined their journey from the very beginning. Even as the stars began to glimmer above the city skyline, reflecting the hopes and dreams of countless people below, the young leader felt a deep sense of peace. He had inherited more than a company. He had inherited a legacy of resilience, empathy, and wisdom. And in nurturing it, he had ensured that the story of their family, its triumphs, its lessons, and its enduring love, would continue to unfold generation after generation, a living testament to the power of forgiveness, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of kinship. The evening breeze stirred gently, rustling the leaves of the garden. The young leader, now seasoned yet still vibrant, rose from his chair and walked toward the house. He paused at the doorway, looking back at the garden where laughter and light mingled, and then toward the horizon, where the city stretched endlessly. The world was vast, unpredictable, and sometimes challenging, but within these walls, within this family, he saw what it truly meant to thrive. And so the story continued, not as a tale of perfection, but as a testament to the quiet, persistent work of love, forgiveness, and commitment. A testament that no wealth could replicate, no title could confer, and no power could diminish. It was the enduring story of a family that had learned how to remain together, to grow together, and to pass forward a legacy not of grandeur, but of enduring humanity. Years would come and years would go, but the rhythm of their lives, the lessons of patience and understanding, and the warmth of their shared history would endure. Each generation, building upon the last, would continue to learn that true strength is measured not in what one controls, but in what one nurtures. And within the quiet walls of the family home, under the ever-changing sky, the story of forgiveness, unity, and love would never cease. The family, steadfast and resilient, would continue to embrace each new chapter with open hearts, ensuring that the legacy of a man who had once redefined success in the quietest of ways would live on, untarnished by time, unshaken by challenges, and luminous in the golden light of every sunrise that touched their home. Every day, in countless small moments, the lessons of the past intertwined with the hopes of the future. And as laughter, learning, and love filled the house, it was clear that the family's journey, though long and intricate, remained guided by a single, unchanging truth. The greatest legacy is not wealth, power, or recognition, but the enduring bonds of a family that chooses, again and again, to stand together. And so, the story of their lives, woven through decades, colored by joy and hardship, shaped by mistakes and redemption, continued onward, each generation adding its own chapter, each day affirming that the quiet strength of love, forgiveness, and unity is the most enduring inheritance of all. The years that followed unfolded with a gentle consistency, as though the universe itself had learned to respect the pace at which this family grew into its full potential. The young leader, now a mature man with streaks of silver in his hair, approached each day with the same deliberate care that had guided him from the moment he first took responsibility for the family's legacy. Every decision, from corporate strategy to household routine, was filtered through the lens of the principles his grandfather had instilled: empathy, patience, and the quiet courage to prioritize people over profit. The family home remained the heart of this evolving story. The garden flourished with new life each season, a vivid reminder of the continuity that bound them. It was here that the great-grandchildren learned about patience, about attention, about the value of unhurried moments. They ran freely across the grass, climbed trees, and asked endless questions, their energy as boundless as the love that surrounded them. The young leader often observed them, sometimes seated on the veranda, sometimes walking alongside them in the sun-dappled garden, always mindful of the lessons life had taught him. One afternoon, the young man took a pause from the boardroom to join his eldest great-granddaughter as she painted in the sunlit courtyard. The canvas was a swirl of colors, chaotic at first glance but vibrant with intention. She looked up at him and asked, "Grandfather, did you ever think our family would grow this big?" He smiled, recognizing the same curiosity he once carried as a child. "No," he admitted, "but I did hope that we would learn how to stay together. That is what matters most." The girl nodded thoughtfully, returning to her work. In her concentration, he saw the same spark he had once seen in his grandfather's eyes, the quiet insistence that life could be shaped by choices grounded in compassion. At the company, the young leader had initiated programs that further intertwined the family's business success with societal benefit. Scholarships were expanded to include not only academic achievements but also community leadership. Apprenticeships offered real-world experience to youth who had limited opportunities. Mentorship circles allowed seasoned professionals to guide young adults through both career and ethical decision-making. The organization became a living laboratory in which values were tested, reinforced, and shared widely. Despite the company's expansion into multiple regions, the young leader made it a priority to maintain intimacy in operations. He visited each branch personally, listening to employees' concerns, acknowledging successes, and ensuring that each office reflected the family's values. This hands-on approach reinforced a culture where hierarchy did not diminish humanity, where authority did not suppress collaboration. Home and work, though distinct in form, shared the same philosophy. The well-being of individuals determined the health of the whole. This approach resonated deeply, especially during times of external challenge. Economic downturns, political instability, and unforeseen market fluctuations tested the family's resilience, but the foundation of unity and integrity held firm. The young leader had learned from his grandfather that stability does not come from wealth alone. It comes from trust, consistency, and shared purpose. As the great-grandchildren grew, they too began to take part in both family and company affairs. Each was encouraged to explore their talents while understanding the responsibility that accompanied privilege. The young leader observed them not to control, but to guide, knowing that nurturing independence was the ultimate act of trust. Lessons were not confined to formal instruction. They were embedded in daily life. Family dinners became forums for discussion about ethics, leadership, and personal growth. Weekends were spent volunteering in community projects or visiting company programs designed to uplift those in need. One evening, a moment of reflection brought the young leader to the veranda, where he could see his family scattered across the garden. Some chasing shadows, some reading quietly, others in lively conversation. He thought back to the first time his grandfather had watched him take unsteady steps. The memory, vivid and tender, reminded him that the same hope that had carried his grandfather forward now flowed through him and into these new lives. He felt the weight of continuity keenly. Leadership, he realized, was not a title to be claimed but a responsibility to be lived, day after day. Decisions were no longer measured only by profit margins but by the ripple effects on families, communities, and generations yet to come. He understood, more deeply than ever, that success without shared humanity was hollow. As years went on, technological innovation began to transform the business landscape. The family's company adapted, not by chasing every trend, but by integrating change in ways that complemented their enduring principles. Digital training programs allowed mentorship to reach remote communities. New data-driven tools helped track the social impact of company initiatives. Sustainability became a guiding metric alongside financial performance. Each innovation was assessed for its alignment with the family's values, ensuring that growth did not compromise integrity. Within the household, family traditions endured, even as generations multiplied. Birthdays were celebrated with laughter, anniversaries with quiet reflection, and ordinary evenings with shared stories of courage, mistake, and redemption. The elders, though aging, continued to participate actively, offering guidance and modeling the values that had shaped the family. One afternoon, a particularly spirited discussion arose at the dinner table. The topic: the importance of balancing ambition with empathy. Voices rose, but no one felt dismissed or belittled. The young leader observed, smiling inwardly. This was the culture his grandfather had dreamed of, a family where voices mattered, where differences were reconciled through respect rather than conflict. The great-grandchildren, now increasingly aware of the family's history, began asking questions about the origins of the business, the moments of hardship, and the lessons learned from past failures. The young leader told them openly, recounting the tales of missteps and pride, of reconciliation and hard-earned forgiveness. He emphasized that wealth and success were transient, but integrity, empathy, and unity endure. The children listened, wide-eyed, absorbing not just the facts but the underlying values, understanding that the family story was as much about character as it was about achievement. Over time, the young leader guided the formal inclusion of the next generation into company operations. They were not rushed. They were prepared patiently, ensuring they understood the responsibilities and ethics that underpinned every action. Apprenticeships, mentorships, and gradual exposure allowed them to grow organically. When they were ready, they were trusted to make decisions, knowing that the lessons of the past provided both compass and safety net. The community felt the ripple effects of the family's commitment. Neighborhoods once struggling to find opportunity flourished through educational programs, mentorship initiatives, and social investment. Children who had once lacked access to guidance discovered avenues to pursue their ambitions. Adults who had been overlooked in the job market found stability and dignity. The company's influence became a force for societal cohesion, demonstrating that leadership rooted in ethics and empathy could produce tangible change. As decades continued to flow, the family witnessed the first great-grandchildren stepping into responsibilities of their own, blending youthful energy with lessons learned from elders. They proposed initiatives that were innovative yet anchored in the family's values. New community centers, environmental projects, scholarships, and cultural programs. Each project was evaluated not only for potential success but for alignment with the principles that had defined the family for generations. The young leader, now older still, often reflected on the arc of his life. From a child holding his grandfather's hand, to a man entrusted with stewardship of both family and business, he had learned that true leadership is a lifelong process of listening, learning, and serving. Each generation brought challenges. Each generation brought growth. And each generation, when guided by the wisdom of the past, had the power to enrich the future. Evenings in the family home remained a haven of calm amidst the ever-accelerating pace of the external world. Conversations over meals ranged from mundane daily events to complex ethical dilemmas, always guided by an atmosphere of respect and curiosity. Laughter was abundant, yet it never masked the depth of understanding that underpinned every interaction. The young leader often walked through the garden at sunset, observing his family engaged in play, study, or quiet reflection. The memories of earlier generations, the first steps of his grandfather, the lessons from his mother and aunts, his own childhood curiosities, mingled with the vibrant present. It became increasingly clear to him that legacy was not a static inheritance but a living, breathing process. It was nurtured through care, humility, and the conscious application of wisdom. One evening, he found himself watching the stars with his eldest great-grandson. The boy asked, "Grandfather, what does it mean to really lead?" The young leader thought for a long moment, recalling decades of experience, countless decisions, and the quiet guidance of those who had preceded him. "Leadership," he said finally, "is about seeing the people around you clearly, valuing them, and helping them become the best version of themselves. It is not about control but about care. And it is never finished. It grows as long as you do." The boy nodded solemnly, then turned back to watch his siblings chase fireflies. The young leader smiled, feeling the continuity of the family's story flow through them. He understood that each new life added texture, strength, and hope to the enduring narrative they had created together. Life, in its steady and unhurried manner, continued to unfold. The family faced inevitable hardships, but each was met with the same patient wisdom that had guided them for generations. The company thrived, not merely in profit but in purpose, and the family home remained a sanctuary of warmth, memory, and guidance. Through it all, one truth remained constant. The greatest legacy was not built in the boardroom or in the vaults of wealth. It was built in the quiet choices to forgive, to nurture, to prioritize unity over pride, and to invest in people above all else. And so the story continued, generation after generation, an unbroken chain of lives intertwined through love, wisdom, and the quiet strength of a family that had learned, at last, how to remain together, how to grow together, and how to carry forward a legacy that would endure far beyond any single life. The family story continued to unfold with the quiet rhythm of generations weaving together. The great-grandchildren, now old enough to understand responsibility, began to take active roles in both the household and the company. Each child carried with them the values instilled over decades: empathy, integrity, humility, and the understanding that leadership was measured by service, not authority. The eldest great-grandson, curious and methodical, showed a particular talent for analyzing complex problems. He often spent hours reviewing company reports with his grandfather, learning to see beyond numbers to the human stories behind them. The young leader encouraged him to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to consider the ethical implications of each decision. One afternoon, as they reviewed plans for a new community program, the boy asked, "Grandfather, how do we know if we're doing the right thing?" The answer came easily, shaped by decades of accumulated wisdom. "We measure by impact, not profit," the grandfather said gently. If our actions help people thrive, if they give hope and opportunity, then we are on the right path. Leadership is not about being perfect. It's about being responsible. Meanwhile, his great-granddaughter had a creative mind and a gift for connecting with people. She took responsibility for educational initiatives, ensuring that scholarships and mentorship programs were not just numbers on a report but transformative experiences for those who participated. She personally visited classrooms, spoke with students, and worked alongside teachers to understand what support would be most meaningful. Her approach reflected the very lessons her family had learned. Seeing the person behind every challenge, nurturing potential, and building trust through attention and care. The family home remained the cornerstone of their unity. The garden, ever growing, became a place where children, adults, and elders alike came together. Storytelling sessions on the veranda continued to be a cherished tradition, where tales of triumph, misstep, and redemption were passed down. The young leader often watched silently, appreciating the way the children absorbed lessons not only through words but through the tone of voice, the warmth of presence, and the consistency of behavior modeled by their elders. As the company expanded into new regions, the family took care to ensure that its culture remained intact. New employees underwent mentorship programs that emphasized values as much as skills. Community engagement became a standard practice across all branches, from environmental sustainability initiatives to local educational programs. The great-grandchildren, under the guidance of their grandfather and parents, began taking leadership roles in these projects, learning firsthand the principles of thoughtful management and ethical responsibility. The world outside continued to evolve rapidly. Technology advanced, markets shifted unpredictably, and global challenges emerged. Yet the family adapted with resilience, guided by the core principles that had carried them through decades of change. Digital platforms were used to expand mentorship opportunities, remote learning programs were developed for underserved communities, and data was employed to measure both financial and social impact. Every innovation was carefully assessed for its alignment with the family's values, ensuring that progress did not come at the cost of integrity. At home, life maintained its gentle cadence. Birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays were celebrated with warmth and attention, often blending multiple generations in joyous gatherings. Conversations ranged from casual chatter to philosophical reflection. The elders shared wisdom with patience, while younger family members brought energy, creativity, and new perspectives. The young leader continued to act as a bridge between generations, facilitating dialogue, resolving conflicts, and ensuring that every voice was heard and valued. One evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, painting the garden in soft gold, the young leader sat with his eldest great-grandson and great-granddaughter. They were discussing plans for a new regional initiative designed to empower young women through education and entrepreneurship. The discussion was lively, with ideas flowing freely, yet tempered by thoughtfulness and reflection. The young leader listened, occasionally offering guidance, but largely allowing the next generation to navigate the complexities themselves. Afterward, he walked slowly through the garden, observing the children at play. Their laughter echoed through the home, mingling with the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. In that moment, he understood the profound continuity of life. The choices made decades ago, the lessons learned through mistakes, the careful cultivation of empathy and integrity, all of it had created a foundation upon which the next generation could thrive. Even in moments of quiet reflection, the young leader remained vigilant. He knew that legacy was not guaranteed. It required constant nurturing. He ensured that family meetings continued to address values, responsibilities, and long-term vision alongside practical matters. Disagreements were inevitable, but the framework of respect and communication his family had built ensured that conflict became an opportunity for growth rather than division. The family's influence extended beyond their immediate sphere. Their initiatives inspired other organizations to integrate ethical leadership and community engagement into their own operations. Partnerships formed across industries, focused on creating sustainable impact and empowering communities. Yet, despite this outward influence, the family remained grounded. Their home, garden, and family traditions were ever-present reminders that real change begins with relationships, attention, and care. Years passed, and the great-grandchildren matured into thoughtful young adults. Each carried a sense of responsibility not only for the family legacy but for the broader world they were entering. They approached leadership with the understanding that power is temporary, influence is earned, and respect is cultivated through consistent action. The young leader, now older, observed them with a mixture of pride and quiet awe. He knew that the work he and previous generations had done was alive in these young minds and hearts, and that the principles they had lived by would continue to guide future decisions. One particularly reflective evening, the family gathered in the garden as twilight settled over the house. The great-grandchildren shared their visions for the future, blending ambition with a commitment to ethics and service. The young leader listened, occasionally offering stories of past challenges and lessons learned, reminding them that courage and humility must coexist. The elders contributed as well, ensuring that wisdom and perspective from prior generations were woven into the conversation. As darkness fell, the garden was illuminated by soft lanterns, the children still full of energy, the adults engaged in conversation, the older generations observing with satisfaction. In that moment, the young leader understood that the story of the family was no longer solely about one man's choices or one generation's efforts. It was a living narrative, shaped collaboratively, evolving continuously, and fortified by love, trust, and mutual respect. The next day, the family continued their routines with quiet confidence. The company's projects advanced, community programs expanded, and family life remained a source of grounding and renewal. The great-grandchildren were increasingly entrusted with responsibilities, their growth carefully nurtured. They carried forward not only the material legacy of the family but the values that had defined every success: integrity, empathy, resilience, and the capacity to forgive. Over time, the young leader's hair grew whiter, and his steps slowed, yet his presence remained central to the household. He continued to mentor, to advise, and to exemplify the principles that had carried the family through decades. He watched as the next generation stepped confidently into leadership roles, confident in their ability to make ethical decisions and to care for both the company and the communities they served. And though the world beyond their home and company remained unpredictable, the family's foundation endured. Their story, marked by reconciliation, learning, and quiet perseverance, was now a living legacy. It stretched across generations, a testament to the power of patience, unity, and the enduring strength of love. Even in moments of silence, the impact of choices past and present was evident. The laughter of children, the dedication of employees, the harmony within the family home, all were reminders that the greatest achievements are often invisible, residing not in wealth or accolades but in the human connections that give life meaning. And so, as the family continued to grow and evolve, the story persisted. Every day offered new lessons, opportunities for growth, and ways to nurture both relationships and values. The young leader, standing as a bridge between past and future, understood that the true measure of a life well lived was reflected in the capacity to inspire, support, and uplift those who follow. The garden, the house, the company, and the countless lives touched by the family's dedication all bore witness to a simple yet profound truth. The most enduring legacy is built through empathy, forgiveness, and the steadfast commitment to remain united generation after generation. And as stars glittered in the night sky, reflected in the city beyond the garden walls, the family's journey continued, quietly, steadily, and unbroken, guided always by the values that had carried them from broken beginnings to a future rich with possibility, love, and unity.